What's up guys, Kyle Felsman Outdoors with you here, and today we will be going over a short and to the point tutorial on how to cast a bait caster. So maybe you just got into bass fishing, maybe you just picked up a new bait caster and decided to try something different. For me personally, the reason I use a bait caster, and I think the reason a lot of other bass fishermen use it, is it is a lot more compact and a lot more stable and a lot more custom configuration to when you're trying to set up the different lures or the different baits you're trying to use. Okay, so let's go over some of the key components you're going to want to understand about your new bait caster before you start actually practicing casting. Okay, so the first thing to pay attention to is this little knob right here. This little knob is going to determine the amount of tension that's actually on your spool when you're actually casting. So if it's too loose, that could cause backlash. If it's too tight, you're not going to be able to get a good cast. So the biggest rule of thumb when setting up your bait caster is you want that tension set just enough to where your lure or your bait falls just at a nice steady pace. So let's push our spool release button, which you'll push when you go to cast. And notice how my bait's not falling. You want to adjust that knob just a little bit there. Just enough to where that bait falls, and notice my reel didn't backlash. So that's set. So just repeat that step with your bait caster when this is the first thing you're going to want to pay attention to when you're configuring it. Okay, so our tension knob's set. So for beginners, the next thing you're going to want to pay attention to is your brakes, which on my reel are right here on the side. You can notice there's a way to you can set them to max, or I can believe you can set them to the minimum. These brakes are actually, I believe, little magnets that are inside your reel that are going to help your spool stop when your cast comes to a stop. So that's going to help prevent backlash. For beginners, you might want to set those all the way to the max. So if you can read that there, you might want to turn those all the way up. I usually like to keep them right at the mid. And when you learn more about your bait caster and you get the feel for it, you can adjust those accordingly. But for now, I would turn those all the way up just so that you can start to practice your casts and get the feel for the bait caster. And we already kind of introduced your button release here. So that little button in the middle is going to release your knob. So when you go to cast, you're going to want to push that guy and hold your spool so that your bait doesn't fall or bait doesn't go wherever it needs to go. And lastly, just like any other reel, this reel has a drag, which is this little guy right here in between your actual reel and your spindle knobs here. You can adjust that however you want to. I normally keep mine pretty tight just so I can get a good hook set on the fish I'm catching. Okay, so now that we got our tension sets, dependent on what type of lure or bait we have on, our brakes are turned all the way up. Let's actually get into actually casting. So as we went over, to start off with casting your bait caster, you're going to want to push that middle button and hold your spool. I would also recommend when you start out to actually tend the spool when you're casting. So when you go to cast, when you make your nice smooth cast, you actually want to very lightly with your thumb tend that spool just to help you prevent backlash for especially for beginners. Some more general rules of thumb to go over is different from a spin reel. With a bait caster, you actually want your casting motion to kind of be nice and smooth rather than a whipping motion, because if you start to whip it, that could cause the spool to go a little bit too faster than your line's letting out, which will cause a lot of backlash. So you want to be a nice smooth side cast to start off with in practicing, and once you get the hang of that, you'll be able to kind of mess around with the configurations depending on what type of fishing you're doing. So the last step is just to get out to an open area, whether it's your yard, whether it's a field. You can even get out on the water and just start practicing and start messing with the different ways to cast. Whether it's a side swipe, you can practice the overhead, which is a little different than on a spin reel. The release points on these bait casters are different, so it will feel a little awkward at first, but once you get the hang of it and once you get a feel for how your bait caster works, you can start to mess with the configurations on here to your liking. And with more practice, your casts will become longer and more smooth. So just get out there, get some practice, and get the feel for your new bait caster. So with that, I hope you guys got something out of today's video. I know for me personally, being short and to the point kind of helps me get out on the water faster and to catch more fish. So I hope it did the same for you guys. If you guys like today's content and you got something out of it, subscribe to the channel. Go check out some of my previous content. Like the video, comment, since I'm always open to suggestions. With that, I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks.